Thank you for everyone for coming back to the session after lunch. It's about 12:19, and before we went into our sessions, before we go into the breakout sessions, as I said earlier, there'll be different points throughout the day that I want to acknowledge people who have been key throughout this process. And one of those people is Jim McCleskey, and he is the federal liaison for North Carolina, who has been with the ARC off and on in that state as a director in different capacities for a few decades. He can tell his story a little bit better than I can. But Jim, are you with us? Are you here?
Hey folks, can you hear me okay?
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you. My camera, I couldn't get to activate. I'm a little hinky there, but you're better off not looking at me anyway. We like the good looking folks on the camera, and y'all look real good. It's great to be with you, and I want to thank you, Ava, for pulling this excellent set of presentations together today. The topics that have been addressed are absolutely key to building this enterprise in a way that is effective and that really reaches the parts of this region that need to be reached and need to be engaged and benefited by this opportunity. Ava's right. I've been one of the many folks interested in trying to bring this forward for a long time. First, had the opportunity to get exposed to the idea of a Southeast Crescent effort starting in really 2000, and then initial drafting of legislation in 01. The first I heard of this, and I just want to relate it because I know there was more work that was already underway, but it was from our university system, and specifically from East Carolina University and from our system-wide president's office. And it was around a study that some of the scholars at ECU put together that looked at paired counties in eastern and western North Carolina, looking back across several decades, that beginning in the 50s and 60s looked pretty similar in terms of socioeconomic status, a number of other measures, relative isolation, and access to transportation and other resources, and tracked over time what changed. And the basic upshot, trying to control for some other factors, was that ARC really made a difference in Western North Carolina. And I want to mention that for a couple of reasons. One, we used it in those early days to make the case to several members of our delegation to be interested in sponsoring a Southeast Crescent authorization bill. And it took till 2008 to pass it. And now here we are all these many years later, actually looking at moving ahead with implementation. But it also really did make the case that ARC has made a difference and has moved the needle. And so I want to say that because I know we've had some conversation here today around $50 billion spent and not enough to show for it. I think I would echo maybe not enough to show for it, but I would not say nothing to show for it. The initial, I think I'm right on these numbers, others can check me on it, but I believe initially ARC encompassed 409 counties designated by the Congress as part of the Appalachian region. That has grown some over time as counties have been added. And the most recent reauthorization of ARC, which was in the bipartisan infrastructure bill that was signed in November, we had 2 counties in North Carolina added. I believe there was one in South Carolina added. So that we're up into the upper 420 range now. At the inception of ARC, about half of that 409, over 200 counties across the region, were in distress. We're now south of 100 in that designation. So the distressed counties, when measured by ARC's distress measures and at the county level, and I know there's a very robust conversation to be had around census tracts and around how to measure distress, and I'm glad we're touching on that today. But we've cut that number in half and more than half. And I think that's important. I think it's worth mentioning that there's been some success, but we've got a lot left to do. Now, the Southeast Crescent, I believe I'm right on this, and the way the legislation's written, and Dr. Tinubu, you're exactly right. The counties are not designated as distressed within the region. It's simply basically in the legislation. If you're not an ARC and not a Delta County and you're in these 7 states, then you're broadly within the Southeast Crescent. It is a very serious piece of work and decision-making that'll have to be made by this new commission as to how to best and most effectively target what are going to be limited resources. And so we do not need to be serving the counties that are doing the best. We need to be serving, one way to put it, my daddy's a preacher, y'all, the least of these. And we've got to be sure that we're properly targeting efforts and resources. It is up to ARC how we designate counties, and it is up to Southeast Crescent to work through that. And we're going to need engagement from committed and smart and long-term engaged folks. And I'm so glad that so many of y'all are on here today. I'm going on too long. I'm going to join Dr. Tanubu's group in the discussion here on racial equity, because it is, to my mind, central to, frankly, credibility and delivery of what this entity is going to represent. I'm going to stop now. Thank you to all of you for being here. Let's do this together.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Jim. I want to take the time to kind of acknowledge a couple of people. I think throughout the day, as I'm looking at those who are in the viewing audience today, I want to take the time to acknowledge some of the people that I call the marathon runners in this effort. As has been mentioned a lot of time throughout this morning, there have been some of us who have been on this journey off and on over the last several decades. And there are some that are here today that I'd like to acknowledge. There are probably, we talked a lot about HBCUs today, and there's probably no other single HBCU who has participated in this particular effort longer and more as strongly as Tuskegee University. And I want to take the time to acknowledge the role of that university in this particular effort, whether it was through the SoftSec effort, or even starting, as I shared earlier, back in the early 90s when Ron Wimberly and Libby Morris attended the Professional Agricultural Workers Conference at the university. That conference, by the way, was founded by Booker T. Washington in 1894, born out of a farmers conference that had started 2 years earlier. So when I talk about the legacy of that institution in this work, it goes back centuries. And so it was fitting that that would also be the same university that would literally be spearhead much of this effort. And so you often hear about the congressional leaders and the legislative folks who participated, and I'm going to highlight some of them later today as well. But we may not hear about the unsung champions like Dr. Walter Hill and Dr. Robert Zabawa and Dr. Ntam Baharanyi, who I don't know is with us, but both Dr. Hill and Dr. Zabawa are with us today. And I could not be more pleased. The role that Dr. Hill has played, I was a young 20-something, trying to figure out my way in this work along with Veronica. And I could not have found a more supportive and compassionate mentor. Someone who he just took the time, not only because of his passion for this issue, but for his passion for the region and passion for people, passion for learning and knowledge. And so I want to acknowledge him. He told me he didn't want to talk today, but Robert's going to speak. And so I want to acknowledge both Dr. Hill for his role in this effort, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Robert Zabawa for a few seconds.
Yay, Dr. Hill.
I just want to say, thanks so much for Ava and all the work that you all have been doing. This is like, this dream coming up after starting in the 90s and even before. And I just want two things. One is, I just love it, this idea of keeping it local and getting into census tracts, because we all know that inequality goes beyond or deeper than counties. So that census tract idea is great. And the other thing too is that we have a lot more allies now than we did in the 80s and 90s. You know, the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta has been a big champion. I see that Ann Carpenter is on here. The Southern Rural Development Center has been a big champion too. I see that Russ Gardner's on here. And even the professional organizations like the Southern Rural Sociological Association. These are people that we can all work together with to help champion those areas and those people that need it the most. But anyway, thank you all for inviting me and just love the participation.
Hey, Robert.
Hey, Robert.
Dr. Z.
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining us. And I could not have gone one more moment without having that opportunity.